If the current trajectory continues, we are about to have the highest scoring season since 2013, with previous seasons, especially post-COVID, suffering a scoring dip. Not since 2017 have we seen a home and away season even get close to the 90-point mark, which is the way that this season has started. But even from a small sample size point of view, this season has gotten off to a quicker start than nearly any other. So, in this video, I wanted to deep dive into 3 very simple questions, even though we are coming off a small sample size. Number 1, how are teams scoring more? Number 2, is it sustainable? And number 3, which teams in the competition are equipped to score at the rate that current teams are scoring at? Let's do it. Now, the first question, of course, being how are teams scoring more? The answer to this is very simple. The evidence is vast. You are in for a wild ride here. So if you just come with me, we're going to get to a really good place. How are teams scoring more? Very simple. Turnover. Now, I've talked about this a couple of times this season already, and I promise you that I can do nothing but apologize for the fact that I'm going to bring it up again. But even more sample size now has revealed that scoring from turnover and punishing teams on turnover is how we are getting this start. It is undeniable now, and nearly any other smaller scoring metric effectively goes out the window. It really does. Yes, there is more than one way to win a game of footy. I understand that. But if you are not punishing teams on turnover, you are not playing the game long term the right way. Sorry, that's just the way it works. Let me prove it to you. Teams are scoring on average to start the year 49.8 points per game per team, which is over 50%. You're looking at 55.2% of all scores this season are coming from turnover, 41% from stoppage. Therefore, if you are going to be a long-term sustainable team and win your anywhere between sort of 14 and 18 games, I don't know whether a team's going to go 19 plus, they absolutely might, but around that top 4, top 6 mark, you're going to have to do it off turnover, guys. That is the way that the game is going. Dominating at stoppage is great, of course it is, and scoring from centre bounce especially, or even forward 50 stoppage, is an elite way to go about it. Teams this year that are scoring especially from forward 50 stoppages and teams that are defending the forward 50 stoppage are coming through in a big way. Again, not as much as the turnover game is. So just to reiterate those percentages, going through the defensive and forward half breakdowns, they're relatively even. Of course, yes, centre bounce is the missing part of that percentage there, but where you're getting your turnovers from, or where you are defending stoppage from, or where you're defending clearance from, is not having that big of an impact on the game, especially not when you're comparing it to what can you do when the opposition make a mistake, whether you force them into the mistake or they force themselves, whether it's a fumbly side or whether it's a bad kicking side. Being able to take advantage of that is going to be key. Turnover is also the only part of the game, and yes, I'm very much including centre bounce here, even though it's 666, is the only time where defensive structures are not rigidly held. Yes, teams are going to differentiate on how they defend the turnover, but if you are going to get quick ball movement, there are only 2 parts of the ground you are going to be able to do that. From a kick-in, where teams like Hawthorn, Adelaide, and even Freo, even though it didn't work in the game against the Swans later on, clearly have got set kick-in practices, and I'm sure other teams have as well. If you are able to get the ball on turnover, you are taking out the ability for opposition teams to flood numbers back, whether it is a side like Hawthorn, for example, who are getting a lot of numbers back, or if you're a team like Geelong, who are having guys behind the ball nearly at all times, and that worked both for and against them in the game against St Kilda, as we know. Teams are going to defend this differently. And where opposition teams are going to get caught out is that if you can't defend the turnover, you are screwed. Just straight up screwed. It's where teams like Essendon have struggled, which for the record, the Bombers kicked 100 points against the Crows. Yes, I know they conceded 161. Do they deserve credit for kicking 100? I still think, considering the fact that only 4 teams in round 2 did that, sure, they conceded 109 points off turnover. 109. There are 4 teams in the competition who haven't done that yet. They did it in one game. Like, that is batshit, to be honest with you. However, to my sort of original point before we go off on a massive tangent. Being able to defend and punish is going to be the way forward. Speaking of that Adelaide game, though, and I've loved Rory Sloane on the Sunday Footy Show and a couple of other places where I've been able to hear him this year, what kind of really frustrated me is that he said that Matty Nicks is going to be disappointed that the Bombers kicked 100 points and that they conceded however many points they did in round one, I think it was like 75-ish, where he said that Matty Nicks is going to want the Crows to concede under 65 points. I have no idea how true this is or not. I'm going to trust his opinion on this, considering Nicks coached him. But the other question is, why does that matter? Now, whilst, yes, having your opposition average 100 points against you is not going to be that sustainable, I look at a team like Geelong in the 90s who just used to be in shootouts nearly every week, and sure, they didn't win a flag from that. But hypothetically, if the Crows are going to have the firepower to kick maybe 100 to 110 points per week, that's going to be worth it if you're conceding 85 instead of 65 points. It is going to be much better for not only you, but your fans if you are winning games 100 to 85 than if you are winning them 85 to 60 or 70 odd. Whilst, yes, winning games is great, don't get me wrong, but offensive firepower is what's going to draw people to the footy. The 80s and 90s, the highest scoring eras of footy ever, are still lauded for that offensive firepower. Are we ever going to get back there? No, but there is something interesting history-wise that I want to go through a little bit later on about that. But if the Crows are kicking 160-odd points, who gives a shit what they're defending? And that should honestly be what's happening. That should be the message. It just needs to be. If you kick 150 points, guys, you ain't going to lose. All right? You're just not. Barely happens, right? And it hasn't happened in donkey's years. So, if you are able to punish on turnover and defend quite well, and you concede 90-odd points, hey, if you're kicking 120, no one gives a damn. But there are 14 out of the 18 teams in the competition who are scoring off turnover more than they are anywhere else on the ground. Stoppage, kick in. 14 out of 18. The four teams that aren't: Carlton, St Kilda, Sydney, and the Western Bulldogs, who have currently combined for a 3-6 win record and a percentage just below 88%. If we adjust that for the start of the season, you're looking at a team that would be 1-2 with a percentage of 88. They are 12th on the ladder. Therefore, the relevancy of that is what it is. Yes, St Kilda did an amazing job against the Cats. They had a really good win. The Swans are finally on the board. The Bulldogs have started their year really well. The good win over North, considering the injuries out, and they played Collingwood till the very end, free kick discrepancy aside. But Carlton are also kind of in the shit. So whilst I'm not saying all four of these clubs play the game the same way, there is going to need to be some improvement. There is improvement to come in every side. No one's perfect after round 2, obviously. But we've played 19 games of footy now in 25, and the team that has won the scoring from turnover battle has won 15 times. Now, whilst, yes, it is very easy to say the team that has scored more in general is currently 19-0 and will continue that way until the end of time, I understand all that, but every other scoring metric, teams have won games losing the marks inside 50 count, the tackles inside 50 count, the scoring from stoppage, the scoring from kick-in, all of these metrics. None have produced a better winning percentage than the scoring from turnover battle. Now, what happened during those games? Well, the Bulldogs lost the scoring from turnover battle against the Kangaroos, won by less than 3 goals. Brisbane over Sydney, less than 3 goals. Ironically, the only time Sydney have won the scoring from turnover battle this season, ironically, because they didn't do it against Freo and pipped them as well. And we saw the Saints defeat the Cats by just over a kick on the weekend. The Cats won the scoring from turnover battle, again, not by a lot. One of the big things in footy right now is momentum and teams being able to kick a lot of goals in a row. And whilst, yes, that can start from dominance out of the middle and setting up territory and stoppage, it is usually coming off a critical turnover. None more so than, say, Hawthorn versus Sydney in opening round with Ollie Florence kick across goal to Connor McDonald. McDonald had an awful night up until that point and didn't really improve, and hope the poor bugger recovers from his syndesmosis injury really quickly, but key turnovers like that are going to swing a game's momentum. There are plenty of other examples, but I'd like this video to not go for 45 minutes. My apologies. And this isn't exactly a new phenomenon either. I'm not bringing some to the table that no one knows about. In fact, the Premiership teams from 2017 onwards, which is the only metrics I've got the access to, David King can go back to 1999 with his contacts at Champion Data. I don't have those kind of contacts, but if you are not top 3 in turnover differential from a scoring point of view, you ain't winning the flag. That is what modern footy has told us, as you can see on the screen. I can't bring anything to the table there that's new to you. That is as simple as if you're not good at this part of the game, you ain't winning the flag. And it even means more than scoring does. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at the ladder after round 2, and I know considering the fact that Hawthorn and Collingwood have played 3 games, Gold Coast have only played 1 and had 2 byes, which is a joke, and everyone else has played 2, it can become a little bit wishy-washy, I suppose. But of the teams that are sitting in the top 8, only 5 of them are in the top 8 for scoring so far. The teams that are the best at scoring from turnover, 7 out of the top 8 teams in the comp are in the top 8 at the moment. The only one that has missed out, ironically, is GWS, who are 11th in the comp, whilst the Bombers are 7th. That is astounding. And there have been times where high-scoring teams either don't win the flag, don't get there, or don't even make the 8. One of the most infamous examples was the Bulldogs in 2005, were a top 6 scoring team in the league and didn't make the 8. And this isn't, of course, equivalent to all other sports, but the San Diego Chargers in the NFL in 2010 were the number 1 scoring team in the comp. They conceded the least amount of points in the NFL and didn't make the playoffs, which is just amazing. But anyway, back to the footy. Because we then get to is this sustainable? Now, the answer to that is actually going to be more so than I think it will. You might already be in the comments so far, or you might be able to see comments on this video so far that's going, you're overreacting to 2 rounds, Daz, and you can happily think that. That's fine. I don't really care, to be honest. But what is becoming more and more evident in this turnover battle is how teams are punishing other teams in terms of their goal kickers. As I said before, history has told us that in a one-on-one space, it favours the talls. You think of all of the amazing talls. If I go sort of more modern-ish era from the 80s onwards, they were amazing players, generational talents, and some of the best we've ever seen, because of course they are. And actually creating space inside your forward 50 nowadays is only really coming from turnover, but it's not exactly favouring the talls as much as it did back then. It's also favouring the smalls. Take the 2 teams so far that have got the most predominant small forward contingencies in the competition. In fact, we'll make this 3. Hawthorn, Adelaide and Brisbane. Whilst, yes, the talls, especially from the Crows, are going really well. Thilthorpe, Fogarty and Walker are presenting themselves as extremely good targets. Mabior Chol, although he was excellent against the Blues, obviously doesn't really have a secondary friend down there. And for Brisbane, they are just trialling to see what works in a post-Joe Danaher world, I should say. Those 3 teams are being predicated on their smaller types. Moore, McDonald, Ginnivan, Watson for the Hawks. Rochelle, Rankin, Keys, Alex Neil-Bullen for the Crows. And of course for Brisbane, you've got Bailey, Rayner, Link McCarthy unfortunately done his ACL, but you've still got Charlie Cameron, and although he's been injured, Kai Lohman is around there as well. If we even look at the goal kicking for this year so far, there are 21 players that have scored 5 or more goals this season. Only 12 of them are talls and 9 of them are smalls. Whilst, yes, the talls are still out there, absolutely they are. If we compare it to as simple or as early as last year, 41 players qualified as over a dozen games and kicked over 1.5 goals last year, and the discrepancy between tall, smalls and mediums is much further than you think it is, with 24, 12 and 5. If you want to concede that those 5 medium forwards are also smalls, sure, you've got 24 and 17. I'm not really comfortable calling someone like Kyle Langford or Will Hayward a tall or a small, which is why them, along with a couple of others, are in that medium category. That discrepancy is real, and the smaller players are having more of an impact than ever. But funnily enough, this has been the way footy's been played for a long time. We just didn't know it because we were seeing the greatest goal kickers ever. What do I mean by that? If we look at the modern day players, and again I'm talking 80s onwards, that have kicked over 800 goals in their career, they don't exactly have the greatest grand final resumes. Take a look at this, for example. Tony Lockett went 0-1 across his career. Dunstall 4-2. We'll talk about that later. Franklin 2-4. Ablett Sr. 0-4. And Matty Lloyd went 1-1, with the total being 7 wins and 12 losses. Now, this can tell us a couple of things. Number one, grand finals are just really hard to frickin' win, no matter who's in your side. But secondary, why has Dunstall got such a good record and the others, well, Matty Lloyd aside, potentially not so? especially when you compare it to the modern day forwards. If we look at the modern guys in that 700 to 800 kind of category, the success gets even better. Tom Hawkins went 3-1, Riewoldt 3-0, Barry Hall 1-2, Stephen Kernahan 2-2, Wayne Carey 2-1, Josh Kennedy, West Coast 1-0, Nick Riewoldt 0 wins, 1 draw, 2 losses. Matty Pavlich went 1 for a total of 12 wins, 9 losses, and a draw. So, what the hell is up with that? And I think the answer to that, very simply, is not turnover battle. It's not contested ball. It's not even one-on-one ability. It's supporting cast. Yes, movies now can get away with only one actor being awesome and the movie still being enjoyable. I am a Saw fan after all, and Tobin Bell is the best actor in the first Saw film, and he basically has somehow an hour and a half and 14 seconds of screen time at the same time. Semi-spoiler alert, I guess. But the movie's 21 years old. Watch it. That Hawthorn side that Dunstall went 4-2 with, he had Dermy, Buckenara, Peter Curran, Paul Hudson, Jamie Morrissey, The Freak, and more. I am not saying they are the only players that these guys played with. I am just saying, just off the cuff, if you will. Hawkins had Podsy Adley, Chapman, Johnson, Stokes, Jeremy Cameron, Tyson Stengel, again, amongst others with him up forward. Jack Riewoldt had the pressurised mosquito fleet of Rioli, Butler, Graham, Castagna. They had the medium in Jacob Townsend. They had one of the more underrated players I've ever seen in Kane Lambert. You've got Shane Edwards there as well. What a superstar he was. Those Carlton teams that Kernahan was a part of, where he had Williams, especially in the back end, and these guys that could kick goals. And of course, the dominator in the early part of those 80s, or late 80s, I suppose, in that 86-87 era, even though Carlton was successful in 81 and 82 before Kernahan got there. That is also massively helpful. If you don't have a whole lot around you ain't really going to help yourself. Who alongside Tony Lockett was a superstar or perennial problem for opposition defences at St Kilda in Sydney? Now, St Kilda, you've absolutely got the right to say Nicky Winmar. I don't have a response to that, but the rest of the St Kilda contingency, not that great. And then he got to the Swans, and it was nothing special. Yes, at the back end of his career, he had the likes of Mickey O'Loughlin and Adam Goods that were coming through. I understand that. But by the time they were ready to contend, the rest of the forward line wasn't up to scratch. Lloyd had Lucas, as we know. And although you may not think they're the sexiest names on paper, Ramanauskas, Jason Johnson, as he was rotating through that midfield, of course, were a part of it. Michael Long was in that side. Darren Buick was in that side. Of course he was. But Essendon were also so stacked in that 2000 team that if you looked at their starting squad, Mark McCurry, who came second in the Brownlow medal in 1999, was on a half-forward flank, and James Hird was on the other one, as guys like Justin Blumfield, Mark Johnson, and Joe Mercedes were lining up in that midfield already. So we can kind of say that the Bombers were the first, well, maybe not the first, but were a modern example of how all-Australian selection works. Let's just chuck some midfielders on a half-forward flank, and they'll be right. And you know what? They were. And then, of course, you get to Gary Ablett Sr., who, because Geelong kept mucking around with Barry Stoneham and Bill Brownless about who was going to be centre-half forward, they played the three talls so often. Who were Geelong's smalls? Now, you could remember footy during that time, and although I wasn't alive for it, I will still back myself in the footy history stakes. No one really comes to mind in terms of long-term, sustainable goal-kicking power that gave Ablett a chance. Yes, Bill was a star, and I think a highly underrated player. And I will contend, until the day I drop, that Billy would have kicked over 600 goals if Barry Stoneham was a centre-half back. I will also contend that Barry Stoneham should have been a centre-half back. But I digress. Would that have helped Geelong win a flag? Who knows? But also, Geelong have got the argument in running into four of the greatest teams of all time during those runs. Hawthorn at the back end of how successful they were. There's an argument to be made. Geelong played that well in that game. They nearly beat anyone else. That Carlton team was one of the best of all time, and they effectively got a WA State squad, which was overloaded with talent in 92 and 94. But that 0-4 still exists, and that turnover and that contingency conversation is still a worthy one to be had. Enough of the history lesson though, let's go back to the modern day where fully flushed out and developed forward lines are going to be the way forward, and they always will be. And I think AFL coaches need to embrace the fact, and I've said this in criticism about Ross Lyon, and I will throw Justin Longmuir in this category as well. Be afraid of conceding 80 points a game. Coach your players on how to score 90. This goddamn 70 to 70 crap doesn't work. It won't work long term. Freo have got a top 4 list in the comp. It ain't working. Right? I think I said that Freo and Sydney play boring close games at Optus Stadium, and oh boy, did that come true. And we know, of course, I've said this about Ross a lot, and that's what St Kilda did against Geelong. They did not have great defensive structure for the second half of that game, and it didn't matter. Or they only won by 7. They had their arms wrapped around Geelong for 3.5 quarters of that game. And if it was 5 minutes longer, Geelong might have won. Yeah, they didn't. And they didn't because St Kilda had set up an offensive game plan built off stoppage and turnover to win the game. So don't give me that crap. Be afraid of conceding 80. Try and score 90. It's the way forward. High-scoring teams win premierships. Who would have thought? And when it comes to the turnover battle, all you effectively need to do, and I say all as if it's simple. It's not. There is a reason why I am in Gippsland, Victoria, talking to my mobile phone right now and not playing the AFL, because it's so much simpler being here. I understand that. But if you have a positive turnover differential, if you get the ball off the opposition more than they get it off you, you're ahead of the game already. Because there are 9 teams in the competition right now after round 2 that have conceded less turnovers than their opposition. 7 of them are in the top 8. There you go. I don't know what else I can say more than that. I mean, I'm still going to say more things, as you can probably tell with the fact this isn't the end of the video. But barring from shaking everyone, that's what I can do. And ironically, turnover numbers are actually dropping. 2 rounds in compared to season averages are less so, which is kind of great. Now, I suspect that these numbers will go up as the weather gets worse. Absolutely, and scoring may drop because of that, but if you remember the graphics from the start of the video, they weren't dropping by much, about half a goal. So we're still on track for an 87-point home and away season, which would be awesome. But I actually think this 90-point threshold is sustainable because we have less turnovers than we've had in recent years, yet points off turnover has gone up. In fact, it's the highest it's been for a decade. And what's scary is that the last time that points from turnover on average for every team in the competition was 50, we had on average 73 turnovers. We're nowhere near that yet. So in all honesty, is it sustainable? Yeah, I actually think it is. And we've talked about the teams that are best equipped at this a little bit, but the easiest graphic that I can give you, again, is not about who wins the Coleman. It's not even about which team has the best tall forward in the game. Who has the most weapons to convert? And if you look at the 21 players in the comp that have already kicked 5 goals this year, and the teams they play for, 5 of them have more than 1. Adelaide have 4, Collingwood 4, North 3, Hawthorn 3, Geelong 2. Guess how many of those 5 teams right now are in the top 8? That's it, 5. So, if your team can't punish off turnover, you're screwed. So here's the question. Which team in the comp is the worst at scoring off turnover? Unfortunately, they were my top 4 side that wasn't there last year, Freo. Shit. So what do you think? Comment below, let me know. Click the like button if you like the video. Subscribe to join the Daz Talks Footy family. I really appreciate you watching if you made it this far. Thank you so much. I went camping over the weekend and as sentimental as it was for my partner and the family, I understand all of that. I'm not taking that away from them. I still hate camping. It sucks. And if you do enjoy it, I respect that. You're allowed to enjoy what you enjoy. I am not saying that you should live your life exactly the same as me, right? Absolutely not. But I just don't get it, right? I spent the entire weekend pretty much like reading and then copped shit from the people that I went with for reading so much. So, can't win. But the Hawks did. And plenty of teams did over the weekend, and there's not too many teams in the comp that have got no optimism around them at the moment, which is what we love to kickstart a season. Thank you for watching. There is going to be a second long-form video coming this week, because I missed out on some weekend reactions. I'm not going to this weekend, though. Thank you for all your support. See you in the next video. Goodbye.